Maritime militia, counting the number of crew of the Philippine Coast Guard and the number of Chinese maritime militia, it's seemed very irrational for the Coast Guard to be the one to board all of this without any pushback coming from all this Chinese maritime militia. What I'm saying is that it's very difficult on our part. Like, you can probably compare this with two uh, policemen, and there were like 100 illegal offenders that he needs to arrest. That is something that is, in terms of force comparison, we are a bit inferior with the number of this Chinese maritime militia. What we usually do is we still challenge them. We patrol on those areas that they are swarming, and then we document them, and then we file diplomatic protests. I know that people are saying like it's not enough that we do this, but uh, that's we just have to live with the fact that that is the Coast Guard. I mean, that's the limited number of vessels that we have. That's why we have been always appealing to the Congress, in which, to be fair with the Congress and the Senate, they have been very supportive now in increasing the number of Coast Guard personnel, in acquiring more Coast Guard assets. But for example, the 97 meters uh, that the NEDA has approved, the National Economic Development Authority has approved last November. Those 597 meters will be delivered late 2026. So as of this time, we're still building up the capability of the Philippine Coast Guard for us to be able to flex some muscles and make sure that all those Chinese maritime militia, no matter how many they are, we can be able to have the same, at least equitable force that can be able to muscle them out of our exclusive economic zone. And then the second response that I would like to share with you is we have to remember what happened in Scarborough Shoal when the Philippine Navy is wanting to board a Chinese fishing vessel in 2012, 12 years ago. That resulted to a standoff eventually, and that become the turning point of the Chinese maritime forces occupying Scarborough Shoal, and then they never left since then. So these are the possible dangers and scenario that we need to calibrate our approach with China. That's why I've always been mentioning this in a lot of my interviews by saying that we need to have a very strategic and calibrated approach in responding to all those illegal actions that China has been doing in the West Philippine Sea. It is not as simple as saying like there's a law offender, then the Coast Guard should catch them. There are a lot of issues and political intricacies behind such action every time we talk about the Chinese maritime militia or even the Chinese Coast Guard.
I guess that's a good segue to my three brief questions concerning Coast Guard modernization, sir. There and in relation to our actions in the West Philippine Sea, some of the defense and open source intel accounts on Twitter, the Filipino ones, are wondering why the Philippines continue to send these wooden vessels in order to resupply, or these small vessels that are easily dented. Some questions from accounts that I'm acquainted with wanted to ask you, sir, why cannot we simply get civilian ships? Wait a second. Why can't we simply get large civilian contract vessels, um, which have metal hulls? Or why can't we make modifications to existing Coast Guard vessels? I believe one account said, add spikes at the end so that if they ram us, it will cause damage to their vessels too. I know that it may seem extreme, but it's generally questions that's being asked by some individuals here in Exco. Would you mind giving a response to that? Why aren't we renting out larger civilian steel-hulled vessels for resupply?
Well, Ivan, I've always been mentioning this that the resupply operation in a Yungin Shoal is purely military operation. that is a decision that has to be made by the armed forces of the Philippines and the Department of National Defense. I cannot speak for them why those resupply boats are wooden hulls, or whether they can be able to procure metal hulls to make sure that it will be able to withstand the high pressure water cannon of the Chinese Coast Guard. Only on our part is that the Coast Guard are being asked on a particular mission to give as, to act as security escorts of their supply boats that they are using. But as to why wooden boats, not metal hulls, Ivan, that is a question that I cannot really respond to, because, as I said, that is being decided by the armed force of the Philippines and not the Coast Guard.
Yes, sir. So another question, Sir J. Tarriela, that's being asked at the moment is that clearly the Philippine Coast Guard and the my apologies, sir, I'm having audio issues. So it would appear that as you mentioned, the Philippine Coast Guard and other civilian agencies would need more assets in order to monitor the activities within the Philippine exclusive economic zone and to assert our claims. So each of these different agencies have their own plan. I would ask, with relations to the Philippine Coast Guard, what are, for just so people can hear, what are our acquisition plans for the near future, specifically larger vessels over and above like 100 meters, helicopters maybe, or fixed wing aircraft? Is there a budget appropriated for this? And is there enough? Is Congress supportive?
Well, the acquisition of the 597 meters will be funded by the Japanese ODA. These are right now we have two 97-meter vessels. These are the Teresa Magbanwa and Melchora Aquino, the 9701 and 9702. Um, these are the biggest Coast Guard vessels that we have, and these actually patterned before the Kunigami class of the Japanese Coast Guard. So right now, what is really on the pipeline is the acquisition of five of this, and the funding will be coming from JICA. The Australian government is also supporting the acquisition of a much more smaller vessels, not the offshore patrol vessel type. So this is also among being discussed with the Australian government and the Philippine government. For the acquisition of aircraft, I know that the Department of Budget and Management has allocated a certain portion of the general appropriation this year for the acquisition of more helicopters and also fixed wing to develop the MDA capability of the Philippine Coast Guard.
And that has answered my next question, sir. I was about to ask you what our allies are doing in order to help modernize and assist the Philippine Coast Guard. But since you've very well answered that, my last question would be: are we looking at local providers, sir, in order to our Coast Guard modernization? Because we know that there seems to be contracts on the way for smaller vessels, and naturally the Philippine shipping construction industry is one of the best in the world. So will we be expecting more orders and larger vessels coming out of Philippine shipyards soon?
Well, the small boats that we are using right now are actually made from Cebu. We have already acquired, I think, more than, I'm not really sure, but something more than 50 small boats are constructed from Cebu. That's also another possibility that the Australian government would like to uh, support the OSTAL, because OSTAL also has a facility here in the Philippines that can support the acquisition and construction of Coast Guard vessels that are supported by the Australian government. So that's a possibility. I think the national government is also discussing it with our allies that if they really intend to support the acquisition of more vessels, then we can make use of the local shipbuilders. And we also have to, it's also worth mentioning that here in the Philippines, there are a lot of uh, shipbuilding, big shipbuilding companies owned by other countries like Korea before, right? So there is the technology here that can support the acquisition of Coast Guard vessel and construction of vessels here.
Before I pass you on to my co-host, sir, and thank you so much for your time. Just a brief mention. I know this is in the West Philippine Sea, but what's the current status for the Philippine Coast Guard, for the Chinese research vessel, the Shenkuo? Is it still in the eastern half of the Philippines? Are we constantly monitoring? What's this update on this?
Well, the Shenkuo departed Shenzhen port, and then it passed through between Basco and Itbayat, and then it went down to northern Samar. Based on the satellite monitoring, it even entered the territorial sea in northern Samar, and then it went to Catanduanes, and then eventually it went down once again to eastern Samar. So the armed force, the Philippines, and the Philippine Coast Guard are currently monitoring the movement of this Chinese research vessel. Uh, on the part of the Coast Guard, we are considering deploying a Coast Guard vessel there to drive away this research vessel. But as of this time, we are still in close coordination with the Armed Force of the Philippines as to the details on whether it's because the Philippine Air Force is also sending their plane to monitor the location of this research vessel.
All right, sir. Alex, you want to take it over? Alex.
Okay, so moving forward with our discussion, I'd like to we will focus on the transparency.
Yes, we can hear you. Continue.
Oh, okay. So I thought I was having a glitch. I'd like to we will focus on the transparency initiative. So this is my question to the good Commodore. Okay, so can you given that the the jet stream pressure from the water cannons is roughly, according to an article that I'm reading now, is 200 psi of pressure, and and you mentioned about our approach in handling the West Philippine Sea tension. We practice what we call maximum tolerance. Can you explain to us why this is the option that we are taking, maximum tolerance? Given that, yeah, 200 psi of pressure, to some people, it's already considered an armed attack. Maybe to the good listeners, you can explain to us why maximum tolerance is our official stance collectively in response to what China is doing to our did to our Philippine vessel.
Well, thank you, Alex. The it is true that I mentioned yesterday that we are estimating that the Chinese use 200 psi in their water cannon as the pressure that bended the metal parts of the railing of the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. So I think it's a fair question. People are asking, why are we still having this maximum tolerance against Chinese Coast Guard's level of aggression? So again, our president has been very clear in his statements that as much as possible, we do not want to escalate the tension. As we are only have always been on the receiving end of the provocation of the Chinese, but this only the time that if ever there will be changes of the operational guidelines, this is the only time that the Coast Guard vessel was subjected to that kind of high pressure water cannon. So I cannot still say that we can let this pass or ignore this, that we're still going to hold on to that guidance of maximum tolerance now that kind of threshold has been um, fairly increased by the Chinese, saying that they are now very effective in containing our presence in Ayungin Shoal and also in BDM. So I would assume that there will be some changes, but again, the guidance of the president, that the reason why the Coast Guard never make use of the water cannon is for us to have maximum tolerance, not to be the reason of the escalation, to deal with them professionally. But with this level of PSI that they use now after this incident, we're going to make recommendation, formally submit the report to the National Task Force, and then perhaps there will be changes or there will be none. But again, on our part, we can just make recommendation. It's still subject to the approval of the Commander in Chief.
Okay, for my thank you, Commodore. And the next question would be is we are our approach is the Philippines under the current administration has really been engaged in an active policy of transparency. Of course, we are labeling it as transparency initiative. So we want to capture and document China's actions in our EEZ. So how long has this been going, this transparency initiative, and has this bear fruit, uh, or did we get some benefits out of this initiative? Can you tell our listeners about it?
Yes, Alex. The transparency strategy now has started last year, February of 2023. The first time that we exposed the Chinese aggressive action is when they used the military grade laser against the Philippine Coast Guard vessel that even resulted to the temporary blindness of some of our crew. So that was the first time that we can say that is the turning point of the transparency strategy. And then a few weeks after that, we exposed the swarming, and then eventually we embedded the media in the resupply mission. So basically, we are already on our 14th month of our transparency since we started last year. So, if the question is, did we gain anything from the transparency? Before I respond to that question, let me first highlight the objectives of the transparency strategy, why it was decided by President Bongbong Marcos to be used as part of our strategy in the West Philippine Sea. The first objective is he wants the Filipino people to really be aware and educated on what's really happening on the West Philippine Sea. We have to remember the fact that before President Marcos came into office, there is a very limited number of information that the national government has been providing to the Filipino people. And besides from that, our former president and some of his officials were also singing a different tune in describing really what is transpiring in the West Philippine Sea. And sometimes those very limited incidents that were publicized are even downplayed by the national government itself. Like, for example, the collision of the ramming actually of FB Jimber. They were saying that it was not intentional. The water cannoning of the resupply mission in November of 2021, the swarming of Julian Felipe in January, March of 2022. All of these things had been publicized, and it's the national government during that time that downplays it. That's why it's very difficult for the Filipinos when President Marcos made the promise during his first State of the Nation address that he's not going to surrender a square inch of our territory to any foreign power, because the Filipinos do not actually know what is the reason why President Bongbong Marcos is making that promise. Because for them, majority of the Philippines during that time is not really aware that the certain level of aggression and harassment of the Chinese government is still existing. So for the president to make all the Filipinos be on board and realize the importance of the fight that he is leading in the West Philippine Sea. He needs to publicize all this aggressive behavior and harassment of the Chinese Coast Guard so that Filipinos will change their perception that China is not really the friendly nation here, that Xi Jinping is not really a peace-loving person, that the former president hasn't really made a good diplomatic relationship with China about the West Philippine Sea. So that's the first objective. Everybody should be on the same page on what is really happening in the West Philippine Sea. And then the second objective is, in 2016, during the arbitral award, that was the time that the President Duterte is already our president. But we never leverage on the landmark decision of the arbitral award. So because of that, most of the national leaders, international leaders, have made to believe that the Philippines is not really serious in fighting for their own position in the West Philippine Sea. So when President Bongbong Marcos assumed office and he wants to rally support for the international community, he needs something to give and show to the international community that he is really serious in fighting for the position and the sovereignty and sovereign rights and jurisdiction of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. And for him to do that, he has to expose the aggressive action of China. And these are the two main objectives why we have been doing this. So the question is, are we effective now since we started the transparency based on those two objectives? Well, you can check on the survey that more Filipinos are supporting now of what is happening in the West Philippine Sea. More Filipinos now are actually engaging each other, talking about in different social media platforms on what transpired in the West Philippine Sea, what transpired in Bajo de Masinloc, what the Chinese Coast Guard, what stupid thing the Chinese Coast Guard did again. So everybody now, majority of the Filipinos, whether you're from Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, are completely aware now of what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. That's the first objective. So did we gain impact? Did we achieve our objective for the first one? I think so. More Filipinos are aware of what's happening. The second objective, rallying international community support. With more countries engaging President Bongbong Marcos to deepen security cooperation, with the success of the ongoing Balikatan exercises, with more people pledging the support of acquiring more assets and modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard, and the G7 countries also issuing a diplomatic communique criticizing China's aggressive actions and bullying. These are all signs of the positive impact of the transparency. So I would say that the transparency strategy that we have been doing since February until now is very effective. And this is the reason why we're doing this.
Yes, thank you for that, Ivan. You have a follow up question to ask.
Sir, I guess for follow up, you expect, sir, just to be clear, that the Philippines will be climbing up the escalation ladder in response to Chinese actions, considering that they decided to climb up first.
Well, in terms of the escalation ladder, the guidance of the president is that they can ask. They have always been increasing the escalation ladder, right? But on our side, we're not doing that. We have always been maintaining or dealing with the Chinese Coast Guard in a very professional level. Uh, on the part of the Coast Guard and even the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we are not being provoked. Despite of their bullying tactics and aggressive behavior, we still maintain their professionalism. We still contain our high emotions, even if we are really tired of all this water cannon of the Chinese Coast Guard.
Okay, Alex, perhaps you can continue your questions.
Yeah. So as part of our transparency initiative, uh, Sir Jay, what can you say about the secret agreement issue, um, that that is a hot topic right now on X? Can you give shed us some light about this secret agreement, and
or
how is this connected to our transparency initiative
or at least
that's been going on?
give us the reaction that you can give. We understand this is a sensitive political issue.
Ivan and Alex, no? When the Chinese government started mentioning the gentleman's agreement late last year, I think that was like November or October. That's the first time that they mentioned about trying to justify why they are really giving the armed forces of the Philippines a hard time in completing the resupply. The Global Times and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China mentioned it's because of the gentleman's agreement. During that time, most of the former presidents were asked, was it during the time of Estrada administration? Was it during the time of Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, or even the time of President Duterte? And all of their living officials who can still be able to defend their former commander-in-chief all stand up and said, during that time, we never heard of any agreement of removing BRP Sierra Madre. So, as early as November or late December, the president has already spoken. He said, as the incumbent president of this country, I'm not aware of any gentleman's agreement. And if there are any, I am rescinding it. He has already rescinded that issue. And then came February, a former official of the previous administration mentioned they had a secret deal, from gentleman's agreement to a secret deal. And then the former legal advisor of that former administration said there was no existing secret deal. And then it has snowballed again, the issue of this, from gentleman's agreement to secret deal to new model. And until now, we are still stuck with that kind of discussion. Who really talked to the Chinese government, or who really talked to the Chinese embassy? That if you're going to trace the narrative and the propaganda and misinformation, the objective of all this fake news and made up stories of China is really to sow discord and disunity among the Filipino people. They want us to be divided, for us to start pointing finger and suspecting each one of us, so that we are not going to stand as a united nation against China's aggression. So for me personally, I think we should already move on the issue on who made the deal, who talked to who had the gentleman's agreement, who knows about the new model and all, because all of this just came from the Chinese government or made up stories of their own trolls trying to confuse the Filipino people and to change the discourse. That the issue here is the Chinese constant and persistent level of aggression in the West Philippine Sea. We don't care about who made the deal. We don't care about the gentleman's agreement, and so far as the president is concerned. Under President Bongbong Marcos, he said all of those deals are already rescinded. And as the commander in chief, he has already spoken. We're not going to made those kind of agreements that would undermine our own national interest. And he said definitely he's not going to surrender a square inch of our territory to any foreign power. So there is no reason why we need to talk about this issue, because the more we talk about this,